Authentication is a cornerstone of web application security, and whilst it's fairly straightforward to understand how we might go about attacking authentication, at least some of the time, it may require some creative thinking. And you'll hear this over and over, I'm sure, throughout the course, but looking at an application, understand what it's trying to do or how it was intended to work, and then picking out some odd or quirky behavior and testing edge cases is going to lead to all sorts of interesting and valuable findings. We'll start off with a quick reminder of what authentication is and the main things to focus on, and then we'll move on to some techniques we can use to find and exploit vulnerabilities within authentication mechanisms. So let's dive in. So in a nutshell, authentication is the process of a user or system proving they are who they say they are. So when you check into a hotel, for example, you show your ID and this proves your identity. Often within web apps, we only use one factor for authentication, and this is usually a password, but we can use multiple factors, and this is commonly boiled down to something you know, something you have, and something you are. And actually, in my experience, this is a dangerous oversimplification of multi-factor authentication. Previously, I've worked with vendors of MFA solutions, and while talking with one of their consultants, we were discussing MFA, and they were saying, hey, yeah, if you have a token, then this is your second factor, and your password, it doesn't matter what it is, it can be shared. And when I said, hey, your password needs to be kept secret to be a valid factor, they were like, no, as long as it's something you know, it's totally fine. So obviously they were getting a little bit confused with secrets versus things like usernames, which wouldn't be as well protected. So the two main things we're on the lookout for are lack of brute force protection and logic issues. And I realized that logic flaws is a really generic thing to say and could be many things, but generally speaking, we're looking at skipping steps in multi-step logging, tampering with parameters, especially if we see them more than once, and of course we'll dig deeper into this in the coming sections. I'd recommend that whenever you see an authentication mechanism, try and map out the flow and understand the different steps that you need to go from not being authenticated to being authenticated and what steps happen in the middle. This is a really important thing to look at when you approach attacking authentication. So getting started, our general approach might look something like this. And I like to keep lists like this, as when we come to a web application, it can feel a little bit overwhelming with the number of things to test, and oftentimes it's even difficult to get started. So if we try to understand the authentication attack surface, this could be a list of things like login functionality, session tokens, password reset, account creation, remember me functionality, etc., etc. And this helps us organize what we need to look at, and we can do it in a methodical way. Notice that I've kind of lumped in session management here a little bit with authentication, but we'll look at session management separately later on as well. I recommend you create multiple accounts so that you can do A/B testing, which we'll also look at later on, and then we can move into testing controls like brute force protection, try to understand what technologies or libraries are being used, testing for logic issues, and finally we might look at the session management after that. I've included a link here to my public notes, which are designed to help you come up with ideas, so when an application behaves weirdly, you can keep pressing forward and asking questions, finding answers, and hopefully getting closer to uncovered vulnerabilities. For payloads and testing checklists, we have other resources that we'll look at later on as well. And finally, I want to briefly mention the OWASP testing guide, and the current version while I'm recording this is 4.2, and this is a great resource that you should be using. However, in this course we'll be focusing on mostly finding and exploiting vulnerabilities within web apps, but the testing guidelines cover a lot of best practices and weaknesses that we should be on the lookout for too, and that we should be reporting to developers. For example, 4.4.1 is testing for credentials transported over an encrypted channel, and this is something that we should check for when carrying out our pen test, but doesn't necessarily require any particular skills or special knowledge beyond just doing the check or running a scanner that is likely to pick up this kind of issue. So we won't be going into detail on these in this course. We'll focus on, like I say, finding and exploiting vulnerabilities that have a big impact on the application. Same goes for best practices like requiring an old password of an account to set a new one. This is something that is covered in the guidelines and that we should be on the lookout for, and we can uncover just as we're stepping through the application, and we can flag as a best practice, but this in itself, without mixed with anything else, is not a vulnerability. So as we go through the modules, take the time to familiarize yourself with the testing guidelines, and I recommend you create your own testing checklist from the various resources that we encounter, along with the labs that we take on and the experiences we have. So let's walk through our first lab together. Now, the point of these guided labs are so that I can share with you the thought process behind testing an application, as well as the methodology. We won't just be jumping to the solution and showing how we can solve the lab. We'll be looking at what steps we need to take when we're testing for this kind of vulnerability, and then of course we'll lead to the solution by following that methodology. Later on we'll have some challenges too, so that we can put what we've learned into practice, but for now make sure you follow along and also follow any other ideas or thoughts you have. I encourage you to be as curious as possible, and remember that many labs and applications can be exploited in different ways, and as soon as we find a vulnerability, we probably want to expand on that to understand the full impact and to see whether it's apparent elsewhere in the application as well. So let's take a look at this now. Okay, for this lab, let's go ahead and open up Burp Suite. Next, start Burp. If you get an error saying your JRE is out of date or something like this, then just click OK. And let's come to Proxy and Open Browser. So we'll be using the built-in Chrome browser. We can close the Restore Pages, and I'm just going to paste in the link to the lab. So obviously I've gone to the Web Security Academy, gone to the lab, clicked Access Lab, and then I've just copied and pasted the link. So first thing I like to do is understand the extent of the functionality that we have and what we're testing. So here we have my accounts, but before we come into this, let's take a quick look, have a view of the posts. Looks like we can leave comments. So on a real pen test or during our bug bounty adventures, we could start fuzzing this for input, although if this is a production system, just remember that obviously this can be seen by other users of the site, so you need to get your scoping correct here. And yeah, we could search for cross-site scripting, we can search for injection attacks where this is going to be stored in the database, so we need to test for SQL injection, for example, etc., etc. But I also want to understand what we have here, so we have this login, and we have Vina and Peter as credentials that are provided to us. We should note that there is a forgotten password feature here as well. And just going to click login. And it looks like we can update our email address. We do have an email client as well, so let's go ahead and look at that. And it says our inbox is empty. So it looks like this email, 0A and 6F, matches this one, so 0A and 6F. So I'm not going to go ahead and update the password right now. I'm actually going to log out of here, come to my account, and let's start with testing this forgot password functionality. And here we can enter our username or email address. So we know that our username is Vina, so we just click submit. Now, usually once I've stepped through the functionality that I want to take a look at, so we've stepped through almost all of the functionality, and we haven't submitted any comments or any information to the blogs yet, and we haven't updated our email. But if we're looking at authentication, then we've stepped through logging in, logging out, and also using the forgotten password feature. So if we come over to here, all of our traffic is in here. And what I would often do is just take a look through, switch on all of these filters, and then try and understand what key requests we want to start looking at and digging into. And of course, a lot of these are pretty stock, so I've got mine filtered from most recent to the top. Yours is probably like this by default, going from 1 down. But if you want to see the most recent requests, then you can do this. Or you can obviously filter by status code, length, MIME type, etc., etc. And most of the time we want to look for things like login requests. So here we have this post to /login, and then we can see our username and password. And here we're setting the session token as a cookie. And we can see that it's secure, HTTP only, and same site none flags as well. So secure meaning that this will only be sent over HTTPS. HTTP only means that if we get cross-site scripting, we can't access this cookie via JavaScript. And the same site is for CORS, and we'll be talking about that later on in the course. And then once this is done, we get a My Account, and the ID here is Vina. So first of all, I see this and I think, could I tamper with this? Because maybe the application is trusting this, so I could just try and use a session token and then set this to Carlos or administrator or other usernames. So this is something that I would probably flag and test for. And then we also have this post forgot password here, and we can see the username is being passed as well. So that's kind of how I'd approach stepping through the application and trying to understand what are the key things to look at and a few of the things to look out for. Of course, there are other things to look at, and we'll build on this as we go through the course. So let's continue through the application and come to our email server, and I think we just need to refresh. And here we can see we have, hello, please follow the link below to reset your password. We can just click on this, and again, we might want to have a look at this token, and we'll probably take a look at sequencer and a little bit of token analysis in a few videos time. And here we have the new password and confirm new password. And notice that it doesn't ask us to enter the old password, although the reset has come in via email. This might be something that's worth reporting just as a minor weakness. So I'm just going to come in with password and password, click submit, and looks like the password is probably updated, although it hasn't logged us back in yet. And let's come back to here and take a look at what happened in more detail. So if you want to, and you're getting kind of overwhelmed with requests, what you can do is you can just highlight certain requests to come back to. So let's just make this one yellow. So we can see this was our forgot password. And then once again, here we have another post, forgot password. So we can just flag this as yellow as something that we want to take a look at. So here we have post, forgot password, temp password token equals AP ends in ED. And here we have the token and the username and the new password. Now the interesting thing to note here is that we have our token, and this alone should be able to identify the accounts that we need to update. And we can also see that the username is being passed here. So either this is an extra username that's not being used, or maybe an extra validation check that is happening. And we can see up here again, the token is being sent in the URL too. So this is a little bit of a weird design and worth investigating, because realistically the application only needs this token and the new password, and it should be able to update the accounts. But the fact that we've got a lot of extra things going on and extra parameters means that we want to go in and see what's happening. So I'm just going to press Ctrl R to send this to repeater. You can also right click, send to repeater, and let's try and see what happens with this. So if we send this once again, we get a 302 found, and if we follow the redirection, we can just click render quickly. It looks like it was successful in updating the password, and we'll just click back again to get back to our original request. And interesting that this token actually seems to be working multiple times, so that's also something that's worth taking note of. If we were able to potentially generate tokens in a reasonable time frame, the fact that they don't look like they expire or they're not just one-time use is also a weakness that we should be reporting. So since the token is being sent in two places, let's see whether we can change this. I'm just going to change this to ASD and ASD. And My hypothesis here is that it's checking whether the token sent in the URL is the same as the token sent in the body, and it looks like it sent this and accepted the request okay, although we don't actually know, we don't have any verification whether this account password has been updated or not, but it's just interesting to see how the application is responding at this point. So let's go ahead and verify that this functionality is actually working, and let's do ASD, and we're just going to change this to password1 and password1. We click send and then come back to the application, log in as Vina, and let's try the old password. We get invalid, and let's try password1 and we get in. So indeed we can see that the application is working even with a fake token. So now what we want to try is that since we know that the token is not tied to the account name or the username or the email address, we can simply try and update the user Carlos and change this to password1, send this, and it looks like we get a new session token, which is okay. And then let's come back to here, my account, Carlos, and password1. And we solved the lab. So really thinking about how an application works, what parameters and what information it's taking from us, testing that information to make sure that it's being processed correctly and still working properly, and then going ahead and finding edge cases. This is how we can be successful finding and breaking authentication vulnerabilities. It does require a bit of creative thinking, which I think is a lot of fun, of course, and so definitely more of an interesting vulnerability to test for. And once again, I can't stress enough that really you need to be stepping through the application, understand the steps that it's taking, so in here looking at the forgotten password functionality, and then testing different things, so looking at, once again, what parameters they are they being processed properly, what happens when we change them, what happens when we remove them, what happens if we send them twice, for example, and all of these other things. And that's it for this video, and I will see you in the next section.